Great, thank you. That was great, Beth and Mattia, and a good sort of launch for talking about cultural humility. So I'm Gail Lynch, and I work at the New School in Global Engagement and International Support Services. I'm not involved in COIL right now, but I used to be at Monroe Community College, part of the SUNY system, and headed up their COIL program. And then Molly, you want to?
Yeah, I'm Molly Jolliffe, coming to you from my guest room in near Rochester, New York. I worked for the University of Rochester for the last 16 years. Now I'm the Director of International Student Engagement in the undergraduate college. Thanks for having me.
Great, so we're gonna, we just want to set out session goals. We have, you know, cultural humility is a big topic, and we really like stripped it down to the bare bones, and you can see that in the style of our slides. Just simple, black and white, nothing special. And we have two goals for you today. One is to just give you the bare bones of cultural humility, some of the concepts to get you started and get you thinking about it, and then to have a discussion. So we start sort of talking together about it and sort of what we all know or how we can learn more about it.
Can we do a quick show of hands, either actual hand or the icon hand, if you have heard of cultural humility or are familiar with it in some way? Excellent, okay.
Good to look around.
Yeah, thank you. Just a disclaimer, and I know you're never supposed to do this in a presentation, but Gail and I are not the experts. Actually, we are exploring this topic. I've been using this for the last couple of years in a program I'm creating on global citizenship. So we're always looking for other folks who are more experienced, and please jump in and add to the conversation as we go along.
Yes, definitely. So when we look at cultural humility, there are basically the three, what we call sort of the three tenets, these 3 points that we wanted to talk about today: lifelong learning, critical self-reflection, and accountability.
Yeah, and this was initially created by two doctors in the late 1990s, Dr. Melanie Trevelyan and Dr. Jan Marie Garcia, and we'll refer to those in the notes so that you can see they have videos and articles, but it was their lens is coming from the healthcare professions field and social work, so that's probably why a lot of you are familiar with that. But it is certainly applicable for international education and just life in general, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think too, just from my experience, Molly and I go way back. You know, I've been in the field too for about 19 years, and this is something that, for me, Molly kind of introduced me to the topic. It's something that I've been, I have elements of it, but when I read about it and when Molly and I talked about cultural humility as a concept, it really sort of put a lot of what I do and think about into one sort of framework that I found really helpful. So we're gonna just go over each of these points. So next slide. So first is the concept of lifelong learning, right? So that I think we're all lifelong learners to a certain degree, right? We're all in education, but it's really looking at that active position of always learning and acknowledging that there really is no endpoint to it, that it's cyclical, and that if we're, unlike cultural competence, for example, which is a paradigm that I've sort of grown up with in my professional career, there is, cultural competence is this sort of a linear model of, phases of from one point, getting from one point of a beginner to the end point of being competent. Whereas cultural humility is saying, no, there's not an end point, that it's cyclical and we're always learning. We are humble and open and flexible enough to realize I need to learn more. I'm open to change and I'm open to challenging those ideas. So when you think about that, what are some ways just that you engage in lifelong learning? And we'll use the chat box here. What are some examples of lifelong learning that you can share with your students, perhaps? These are just 2 questions to get you going, but don't feel you have to you know, stick to these questions. In terms of lifelong learning, of being humble and open, go ahead and put things into the chat box of how you engage in lifelong learning, or how you can see lifelong learning might fit with your virtual exchange, maybe challenges or situations. Yeah, attending this webinar, definitely. I like the word mindset, the mindset of cultural humility in general. Well, you can help with some of these.
Yeah, always learning from the latest thinking. I interviewed someone locally who is a leader in this area, and her practice was to pick up a different newspaper every weekend from different local organizations or different cultural groups to you know, get the inside perspective.
Yeah, and just participating in the different communities, professional development, being married to someone who's from a country. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, even going in on, yeah, go ahead.
Reading first-person accounts, watching documentaries.
Yeah, checking like what's in your Instagram feed, like who are you seeing more often, what are you reading, what are you watching, shake it up a little.
Yeah, good. All right, let's go to the second slide.
Okay.
So the next point is critical self-reflection. So we want to think about our own identities and what is our position. And Beth and Mattia kind of talked about this as well. Like we come at certain things with a particular identity and position. So we want to think about how are we presenting that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and how is it being received, right? Consider your role in the situation and challenge that, and also examine the assumptions you bring. So critical self-reflection is about looking at ourselves and what we know, and if we don't know something, right, are we able to admit that? And then thinking about our position and how we may not be the experts in the room, right, that each person is bringing knowledge and expertise. Molly mentioned that the Drs. Trevelyan and Murray Garcia come from a sort of healthcare, medical, social work lens, and when you think about you know, that your client is also bringing expertise to the situation to help you understand their needs, right? And same with the students in our cultural exchange, that each of the students have something that they're bringing. It's not just us. So really thinking through that critically.
Hey, Gail, what comes to mind for me for this one is I'm, you know, kind of in the middle of my career now, and when I started, I knew nothing. So I actively, you know, sought out new materials and engaged with people to hear stories. But now I work mostly with Chinese students and parents, families, and I go to China twice a year. I think the risk for me that I have to keep reflecting on and checking myself is that I think I'm the expert now.
Or you might feel like you're the expert on your campus, right?
Right,
because
right.
In a sense, you are the expert on your campus.
Yeah, and I'll meet with a student, and they'll tell me I'm gonna change my major to this humanities major, and I'm like, really? And I'm like, whoa, I need to check myself and like imagine that experience from the student's perspective, that their advisor, you know, I'm like, well, have you talked to your family about that? You know, I'm bringing in a whole bunch of my baggage and my assumptions into that advising scenario, instead of treating that student as an individual and just listening without judgment. So without that reflection, I think I would have just moved right along to the next appointment and continued that behavior.
Good. So we've got a couple of questions again, just to put things in the chat box here. What do you find most helpful as you practice critical reflection? And what are some things maybe to help our students critically self-reflect? I think one thing when I was listening to Beth and Mattia to your presentation about community agreements, that involves, I think, just critically reflecting at the get-go. And then because you have this active agreement throughout the semester, you're thinking about, wait, am I practicing what we set out at the beginning?
And Jennifer had a good question. Any advice, suggestions in supporting faculty to adjust to the self-reflection of not being an expert? They may feel they are in the area of expertise when they teach in a typical on-campus class, but introducing COIL could bring a new element culturally that they're no longer the authority about. Yeah, any advice on that?
That's such a great point. I think part of it is, I would point back to that lifelong learning, right? That we're, especially for educators, that we're all lifelong learners, and you're an expert in your field, right? But cultural knowledge and cultural humility, right? It's not about the competence. So you're not gonna like get the PhD and be done and be the expert, because in cultural humility, it's like we're always learning. It's a cycle where we learn something, we mess up, we learn from the students, we learn from the others. And so I think if you frame it maybe in that way, then it's a different, it's getting at it from a different angle. But if other people have ideas, yeah, put those in the chat.
Well, it also goes right into the conversation of moving away from the sage on the stage to being the guide on the side. And there's also a thrill in that we are all learning together. And, you know, when students say, well, you're supposed to be the authority to the professors or to the teachers, instructors, but it's a realization that we're all learning, and that there's more to learn, and that perhaps the students are going to find out some more information to even teach the teacher, which can be scary for a teacher to hear.
Yeah, I think that flows nicely into the third tenet as well. So this is what makes cultural humility very different from other concepts that we're all probably very familiar with, cultural competence and communication, is that it forces action. So we're not supposed to just have that realization, do the reflection, but we are also accountable to ourselves, but also to through the institution. So to create positive change. So the little quote that I wanted to share here is, though individuals can create positive change, communities and groups can also have profound impact on systems. We cannot individually commit to self-evaluation and fixing power imbalances without advocating with larger organizations in which we participate. Cultural humility, by definition, is larger than our individual selves, and we must advocate for it systemically. So that's the true difference here, is this third tenet is a call to action and to work within our circles, within our communities, and with our organizations to make positive change. So one of the ways to address that self-reflection piece, but also accountability, is to make sure that you have built strong relationships with people that you trust, that you can hear, you know, sometimes difficult feedback and have those conversations. So having a cultural informant that you can truly ask those questions and say, like, how did I present in that meeting? Or how did that, you know, course go? Truly tell me, you know, how did you receive that information that I was trying to share, and how did that land for you? But then taking it to the next level, when you uncover those power imbalances, when you are able to put yourself in other people's positions and see how the power is distributed in whatever space you're working, what do you do to address that? So in your place at this point, you know, I'm a supervisor, a manager, I'm running the programs, like I have the power to correct some of those imbalances, at least work towards hearing more voices, including people in the room that haven't been before, and always putting like the students at the center of what I'm doing. So not assuming that I know what's best, and other things like that. So providing avenues for genuine feedback constantly in multiple ways, multiple formats is key. And then being open to receiving that, even though it might be prickly at times.
It sounds like feedback and also reflection, just
Mhm.
opportunities for reflection.
I like
Should I go?
just the visual between, like we're moving away from that continuum at the line to the, the action reflection, sort of that lifelong learning that we're always learning. I think it was, I want to say Claire, somebody put in the chat, it's the journey. Another metaphor is the journey. It's not about it's not the mountaintop. We're never going to get to the mountaintop. It's about that journey, that lifelong learning. And I think that's a really helpful place to sort of jump off from culture of humility.
That was actually Carolyn who said that. I really liked it.
Oh yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, Carolyn.
I can share a quick story. While I was digging into all the research about this and trying to live it, practice it, a couple of years ago, it was also when some of the first executive orders came out, and undocumented and DACA student support is in my portfolio, but it's a very small piece. But it all came out at that time. There were protests on campus. There were calls for us to be a sanctuary campus. And personally, that's what I would like too. That's where my values stand. But from the administration level, I was being asked by student leaders to, put these things forward to the president. We want to sign these petitions. They're very active. And I was becoming the no. And it was a hard place for me to be. We're funded by NIH and federal grants. Like, a lot of these things just weren't possible for our institution. It became really uncomfortable. So the student leader, a graduate student who was doing his dissertation in this work, he became the voice for these students. And so I invited him to meet with me. I created a group. We met regularly. I didn't lead the group. We just did a lot of listening, tried to take it back to get answers. Ultimately, I couldn't change the outcomes of some of those answers, but what I did was concede my power in that space and admit a lot of that to the student. And I ended up hiring him as a grad assistant, and he would come into my office. I would leave my space. He would have my office on Fridays, and he would see students and counsel them and connect them to the support resources in ways that I was never able to do, because he's a trusted insider for the students. And I was, this lady in the hall with the deans. So he made these great inroads and was able to find that middle ground where I could also live my values. And when I reflected on that at night, I felt really good about the progress we were making, but it really had nothing to do with me. I had to step back and admit that that wasn't my place. My place was really to put him forward and to let him do his work and support him as much as I could. He ended up going to another institution, and right now we're signing the first domestic exchange agreement for undocumented students with the institution that he's at in California. So, it was a huge benefit for me to recognize that I need to concede my power in that space.
Wow.
There's one quick question on how can cultural humility be practiced in body language, given how important body language is to communication, from Paul. Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question. And I think it's just learning. My thought is learning how we position ourselves with our body language is communicating something. So thinking of my own identity, my own positionality and power, and how I might be using that. It's one thought.
And I think it's a position of listening. It's the body language of listening.
Yeah. So there's lots. This is just like a totally stripped down version to get it, get you excited about thinking in terms of that sort of that approach of being humble and humility and helping our students and even our faculty members, right? If you work with faculty, but whoever you're working with and ourselves too, to really approach it from that humility, curiosity, openness that I could be wrong. I have so much to learn, and I need to really reflect on who I am and how I'm in this position, and how can I advocate for larger systemic structural changes, like in Molly's example. So the next slide, Hope, are just a few quick resources, but we really encourage you to look more into this. I know a lot of you are familiar, or you might, like Molly said again at the beginning, we're certainly not starting to be experts. This is just something we've started diving into, and we would love to, hear more and encourage you all to practice this in your own work with Virtual Exchange.
Thank you so much. We will
Great
be
chat here.
good. We will definitely share this presentation with everybody so that there's so many good things to get from it. Thank you so much, Gail.
It would be great too to save the chats, right? We can save the chats.
Oh yeah, definitely.